Hello and welcome to the Rise Up with Orion podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. I could not be more excited about this very dynamic discussion that we're having. And I'd like to introduce Mitch Main. I'm excited to see him again, and our paths have crossed. So Mitch is a well-known voice in the cybersecurity realm and the author of several thought leadership articles and the host of multiple podcast series. His areas of focus include threat intelligence, incident response, and hacking expertise, and how they work together to help organizations combat and recover from cyber attacks. With a background in journalism, Mitch specializes in translating rich technical content into actionable, consumable information for the everyday business user. He holds a master's degree in communication and media from Stanford University. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us.
You make me sound so smart. I
Well,
appreciate it.
and that was a tongue twister. I'm surprised I got it all out.
Yeah, a lot of those words are a little nerdy. So yeah, I'm in cyber. I have been in cyber for almost a decade now, and I'm an accidental cybersecurity professional. I came from journalism, and I wrote about really complicated things, religion and politics mostly, and a guy who ran a cyber agency like had been reading me. I don't know why, right? He's like called me up one day and he's like, "You have to come work for me." And I'm like, "I have no idea what you do." He's like, "Look, you just wrote an article about like a central tenet of Islam and passing a bill in the Kentucky legislature. And not only did I understand it, I was interested in it." He's like, "I need that. So come work with us." So that's how I got into cyber, and I loved it because it helps me make the world better, but it's stressful. So
Yes. Oh, well, yeah. Speaking of our topic, Mitch, it was so great to be introduced to you because you've got such an amazing background from the journalism to the cybersecurity. But the reality is, and you just barely touched on it, this is a scary world that we're living in, and you are up close and personal.
it is a scary world that we're living in. It's scary for cybersecurity professionals, and we mentioned this before we actually got on air. There has been a lot of research that has come out just in the last couple of weeks about the state of mental health in the cybersecurity industry, and it is declining and declining rapidly. We are seeing a lot of layoffs. We are seeing cut budgets. We are seeing an increase in the type of attacks and an increase in the sophistication of cyber criminals and how they are attacking both private sector and public sector companies, as well as personal individuals like you and me, right? How they're coming after us with those fake phishing SMS. So we are under a lot of duress. And when it comes to just being a consumer, like somebody who's not in the cyber realm, we're also under pressure because we see these emergency SMSs like, contact Citibank immediately. And we click those links, and you know what? Our stuff goes right over to the cyber criminal. And then it's on the dark web, and then it's sold over and over and over and over again. So no one is really not under pressure when it comes to cybersecurity.
Right. Oh my gosh. And it's so true. And it's interesting too, because I just had a couple this morning, and it's so hard not to click on it. And we had multiple emails go around as well, just, in and outside of the organization, and no one is safe. I think that's, something to always remember. So Mitch, where do we start with this? So what are security pillars? Or we actually talked about dominoes when we were advertising this podcast. So what are security pillars or dominoes? And what are some of yours?
That is a great question because I've had so many people ping me on Instagram and LinkedIn saying, "What's the domino? Why a domino?" And so, how I got to that sort of analogy is you can think about these. I have four. So, you can think about them as like the four corners of a pyramid, if you will. But I think about them as dominoes because remember when you were a little kid and you would play dominoes and you would stack them up? I never actually played the game, but I would stack them up because
Oh,
they're
of course, of
simple.
course.
Um, if one of them teeters, it's going to bump the other one, and then that bumps the other one, and that bumps the other one, and pretty soon they're all down on the ground. So that is how these four pillars work for me, is if one of them is off balance, it can bump the others, and pretty soon all four of mine are on the ground, and I get a little bit messy. So
Mm-hmm.
I have identified what my four dominoes or corners are. And for me, they're pretty simple. Um, I like to think of them as food, sleep, exercise, and a spiritual practice. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in depth if you want. They combine to keep me centered, Tara, in a really unique way. So I'm an overthinker, which I think describes everybody listening, right? This is because we're all consuming so much media, and my brain likes to chew and chew and chew and chew on things. And what these four things do is they give me another option. So I'm not chewing on, am I going to be under attack from
No, yes.
is there a threat actor after me? It gives me something positive to focus on, and it sort of replaces the negative thinking that I am absolutely defaulting into most of the time. So
100%.
you want to talk about how I get off center? I think I should just be honest here and tell you what that looks like. So off center for me includes a couple of components. Number one, it's overthinking and catastrophizing. Those are my two favorite pastimes. I play disaster movies over and over and over in my head, and they all have like some sort of cinematic terrible ending. And that is my sort of default thinking. My second thing that I do is I have a lot of imaginary conversations that I either plan will happen where I sound super clever and the problem is solved, or I wish would have happened where I sound super clever and the problem is solved. 99% of the time, those never come to pass. I get anxious, I get irritable, restless, and discontent, and I tend to force solutions and become a little controlling. Shock, I'm a little controlling. My test is what I call the four-way stop sign test. So if you're at a four-way stop sign, and the first thing that I am thinking about is I am going to get my turn and nobody better freaking cut me off. It's like,
yeah,
and somebody does, and then I'm like,
controlling.
ah. If my reaction is out of proportion to what actually happened, then I'm off balance and I need to go back and re-examine my dominoes.
Yep. Mitch, what's your suggestion? And I'm thinking about myself as trying to figure out what my dominoes are. And I actually am, realizing that I think I have more than four for myself. But again, this is me introspectively thinking about it. So what's your advice in helping other people? We're really talking about resiliency, figuring out how we can, set our life up for success. What is your advice in helping others identify what theirs might be?
Well, I think all of us probably intuitively know what keeps us centered and what keeps us balanced, but we don't actually think about it actively and identify them. Some of this is trial and error, and some of it is like just literally thinking for 5 minutes. It's like, where did I feel my best? What was I doing when I felt my best? Yep. Was it hiking in nature? Was it taking a bubble bath? Was it getting a massage? Was it at the gym, which is one of my favorites? So sitting down and actually thinking about where you feel centered is a great start. A second thing to do is trial and error. There are a lot of really good resources out there to help you get started, like meditation is an example. And try it out. It might work for you and it might not work for you, but give it some trial and error. Most people, I think, have between 2 and 4. I pick 4, but if you look at my spiritual practice, that list is long and mighty, and it should be, because then I have a lot of options to choose from. So if I'm here at home, I can meditate. Can't actually do that in an office, but I can do breath work and go lock myself in the bathroom. So
yeah,
just trial and error and think about where and what actually centers you and keeps you calm.
Yes, and a lot of the times too, and as I think about my resiliency dominoes as well, I'm thinking back to what doesn't bring me joy as well. So again, kind of weighing both of those options is, what do you feel your best doing? And what are some of those things that maybe we need to remove? It could be people, it could be an environment. There's also things as well that you could figure out what your resiliency dominoes are by removing some things as well.
Well, and it also could be an activity. I mean, there are things that all of us do to ourselves that we don't recognize harm us. Overworking is a big one. Over caffeinating is another one. So not only look for the things that, the people, places, and things, but also look for the activities that get you off center.
So Mitch, what happens when one of your dominoes falls? What happens if you skip the gym this week? Tell me about that. So one falls and you mentioned that the rest of them go.
It happens all the time. So I will be completely frank. There are 4 of them for me. And at any point in time that you contact me, one of them is going to be teetering because I'm not perfect and none of us are. So the first tip is drop the perfection, folks. It's like you're not ever going to get these things perfect. But if I allow one to teeter and I allow it to teeter too long, it's going to bump the other one. I'm going to pick on actually sleep because that's a really important one for me. So I know that I can go for a day on bad sleep. I can perform decently on a day for a day. One day is all I get.
One day.
One day is all I get. And if I
Yep.
go for 2 days, what happens is food's going to start slipping because I'm going to get overly anxious and I'm going to over caffeinate. And when I'm anxious, I don't eat and I don't go to the gym because I feel like I don't have time and I'm tired.
And I'm
So then the
exhausted.
third one
Absolutely.
starts slipping. And then I'm like too tired to get into my spiritual practice. And pretty soon all four of them are on the ground and I'm a hot mess.
Yep. Exactly.
So that's kind of what the unstacking looks like and how they all get on the ground. And it can happen fast. It can happen within 3 or 4 days.
Right.
So think of this thing as an actual practice, which means practice. What does that mean? You have to do it a lot and all the time.
Yes. Yes.
So my trick, Tara, is if I'm all four on the ground and I have been there and I have been there recently, the trick to getting up to speed for me again is not being a perfectionist, and that is again my default. I want to get them all upright as quickly as possible. Wrong approach for me. My trick is to pick one of them: sleep, food, exercise, or spiritual practice. Get that one upright because just like they teeter and knock each other over, they can pull each other back up again. So once I start getting enough sleep, I'm like, okay, well, now I have the wherewithal to eat better and to get to the gym and to meditate or journal or whatever I need to do to calm this nonstop mind of mine.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about a book that I just finished, and it was all about progress, not perfection. So I love that you said that no one is perfect, not even yourself. And it is a practice. I think that's really important for all of us when we're thinking resiliency and we're thinking about, quieting these minds that unfortunately we all have. It is a practice, just like meditation or yoga would be. It's not something that happens tomorrow.
Well, and the thing that also I got a lot of this is like, oh, it's great that that you have this, resiliency practice, but I am so busy. It's like I just don't have time for any of that. And this is attached, I think, to the expectation that someone else is going to do it for you. And it's nobody is going to do this for you. You have to make yourself the priority. And I actually go into my calendar and block off 2 hours a day just so I can do nothing or do one of these things or do two of these things. And I have some time to actually focus on me. No employer in the world is going to hand you that 2 hours. No person in your life, your spouse, your mom, your dad, anybody, even if the ones who love you, no one's going to hand you that. You have to make this happen yourself. So care about yourself enough to make it happen. Care about yourself as much as you care about somebody else that you want this to happen for. I wouldn't want you to like not take time. So why would I want me to?
Exactly. Yeah, you treat yourself first. Exactly, because let's be honest, having, a spouse and kids, if I'm not treating myself right, they're going to they're going to be getting the backside of that.
Yeah, and I know that my coworkers can tell when I'm off balance too. Although over the years, this is another trick that I've learned. It's like just because it happens in here doesn't mean it needs to come out here. And for the way, for those of you who are listening on the podcast, I'm pointing to my head. It can happen in my head, and it doesn't mean it has to come out of my mouth. It's like there can be a distance between what I think and what I say. So
Yes.
sometimes I'm actually not as much of a jackass as I think I am, which comes with a little training and patience.
Yes, I was going to say, just like everything else, it's practice. It's, progress. Exactly. We have to learn to quiet the voice in our head so it doesn't come out. I totally understand that as well. Um, so I have a question for you. When we're talking about this teetering momentum that's happening, is there any way that you can identify this before it happens, or do you have any advice for our listeners on how to keep an eye out for this? What's happening?
Yes. For me, it's pretty simple. I mean, I use the example of sleep, right? It's pretty obvious when you're not. I mean, if you look at your CPAP machine, if you're
Yeah, right.
it says you got 3.5 hours sleep. Okay, that's but we all know when we're not getting enough sleep. We also know when we're not eating right because our body's going to tell us within a pretty short order. And the same thing is true with exercise. You know when you're not getting to the gym. How I know is how I start to feel. I begin to just feel what I call jangly, and it's vague and it's amorphous. And I am a human. I am also a human. I didn't know this until I actually started this really kind of deep practice of resiliency. I'm a human that is I have a lot of fear, man. It's like that is one of the baseline defaults that my mind wants to go to. And ironic that I'm in cyber, right?
Yes, I was going to say, well, you're right in the heat of it all the time.
And when I start feeling that sort of vague, amorphous, unpinned fear, then I know that something is amiss and I'm off center. And I'll tell you something that happened to me today, and this is actually even before I got on this live stream. This gives you a window into Mitch's warped little mind and how I can help it move along. My default when I'm a little overtired, which I am right now, is I started feeling really excited about doing this. I'm like, this is awesome. I love Terra. I love what Orient stands for. And I love to talk about this stuff, right? And help my cyber geeks out and also help the rest of the world. And then once I started getting excited, there was this little voice that popped up. It's like, ooh, wait, don't be excited because there's something that you need to worry about. And oh, what is it? It wants to flip the channel immediately to worry. That is an indication to me that I am somewhere not keeping those dominoes correct.
Right.
I want to allow myself to be happy. And so it's like, okay, well, if I'm not
Right.
allowing myself to be happy, then I'm off balance.
Yes, the joy killer. Yes, and we all do that, right? It's where imposter syndrome comes in. We've spoken about that on our podcast as well. Do I want to get you started?
Oh, that's like a big one. I did one on imposter syndrome as well recently. And I talk about that a little bit. And if we want to talk about my spiritual practice, I talk about how I kind of overcome that. So when we get there, I'll share some tips.
Yes, no, I mean, and that's kind of the way that we're going. For me, I know when some things are teetering, is my patience level. And again, unfortunately, two
Oh,
small
yeah.
children kind of bring that out. But again, I have a lack of patience with myself as well. Mistakes I make, or an email I didn't edit right. So again, unfortunately, the patience gets turned back on myself. So that's how my teetering starts to happen, is my patience is shot.
What
So
about
I've
how your
identified that for
reaction
myself.
is to so your proportional reactions? That's a big test for me. Is like
Mm-hmm.
if I am super pissed because I didn't edit an email and my anger level is 10 and the mistake
Mm-hmm.
is, 0.5,
Ooh, yes.
do you do that? Am I
Yeah.
alone in that?
No, it's a mountain out of a molehill, right?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Yep,
yes, absolutely.
absolutely. So again, for our listeners, you had mentioned 4 pillars, and we kind of touched on it just briefly a few minutes ago. So you've got sleep. For all of our listeners, they know that I am a certified sleep science coach, so I am a big sleep nerd. We talked about sleep last month in our podcast. We've talked about food. Food is huge in the health and being arena, as is exercise, but not very often do we talk about spirituality and spiritual practice. And it means so many different things to
It
so many
does.
different people around the world. So, what do you mean by that in your little world,
Well,
big world?
I have come to realize that when people hear that, they think of religion. And a lot of us have had negative experiences in our religion, or we love our religion and we think we already have that. And both answers are wrong.
No.
um, Spirituality is not religion, but it can be religion. So if you do have a religious practice and you want to sort of imbue that with a few other things, I think that's magnificent. If you're not religious or you're even atheistic, it's like these things can still help you out because it's not about identifying a Buddhist god or a Christian god. It's about identifying something that's bigger than you. And all of us have something that name one thing that's bigger than you, that has more power than you. Just name one. The sun, nature,
Yeah, the moon, the
society,
universe.
your group
Yep,
of friends.
exactly.
So it can be anything that's larger than you. And it's the idea of connecting to something larger than you that you can draw power from, and that you can actually turn things over to that you can't control. So there are a couple of ways that I do that. And I'll talk about them if you're game, if you want to
Sure.
hear.
Yeah.
So journaling is a really important thing for me. And why that is important for me is it helps my overthinking, because almost every morning I wake up and I start thinking about, I have like a 5 page long to-do list. And I start thinking about that. And then I start thinking about my family relationships and my interpersonal relationships. And how am I going to get this other thing done? And oh my gosh, I have to get a real ID. How am I going to get an appointment at the DMV? Breathe. And
Mm,
if I sit down and write in my journal, I can actually bullet point out all of those things that are spinning around in my head, and I also sub bullet out all of the disasters that I'm thinking about. So
hmm.
it takes me, 15, 20 minutes to get that out of my head, but wow, once it's out, it feels better. It's just like
Yeah.
it's like word vomit. It's come out
Oh my
and
gosh.
it's a little bit clearer.
That's funny that you said that because in my sleep workshops, I call it a worry vomit journal because, so many of us do feel better once we get that out. And, that's a fantastic way to think about it.
Well, these entries for me often become like a letter or a prayer to my higher power, right? And I usually start them with like, universe, I got to get this crap out of my head, and I'm going to totally word vomit. And this is in no particular order, but you got to take this crap for me today because I
Hmm.
can't deal with it. And
Yep.
then the bullet point list. And then as I feel better, I'm just like, okay, I'm turning this all over to you. Just show me what my next right move is. I just want
Hmm.
one action item out of this.
Yep. One
So then
domino.
yep, exactly. So I can take that and then I put it in something I call my worry jar or my God box. Have you ever talked about one of these?
No.
All right. So this is a physical act, and it's very important because it is physical. It's not just a mental exercise. I print that list off or I write it out and I fold it up and I put it in a box. So I've chosen this box that originally came, it was a gift from somebody when I had broken my leg and I was really in a kind of a bad place. And it had all these like really amazing, like healing thought cards. And on the top of it says like gratitude and peace and love. And I print that list and I fold it up and I stick it in the box and I close the lid. And then the next time I start to
Mm.
obsess on whatever it is, the appointment at the DMV, my next work project, I think, wait, I don't have to think about that today because I've already given it away. And somebody who's bigger than me and stronger than me, a power greater than me, has that. So I'm free. All I got to do is wait for the next right thing.
Hmm.
So that physical act is really, really helpful for me. Um, I
I've
also,
heard of people who did do something similar where, the joy of, maybe the winter or camping season, where you actually put it in the fire,
yeah.
light it on fire, if you will. It doesn't need to be, literal, but for some people it is, to let that just go away, and I do that quite a bit in my meditations as well. And I'm sure you're going to talk about meditation. But
Oh,
again,
let's
there's
go.
so many of those visualizations where you're just like, just got to light it on fire and let it go.
Yeah, and that's actually a really important thing because it combines speaking of
Physical, mental.
overcaffeinated people, mental and physical, and those when you combine both of those, which the gym does for me, I actually get a lot better results. If I'm just thinking about how I'm going to get better, then and I don't do anything physical about it, I don't really get very far. So let's
Hmm.
do talk about meditation though, because
Yeah.
that is one of my favorites. Have you guys have talked about meditation on this?
We have, yeah. Last year we actually did a whole bunch of kind of guided meditations on the podcast. We talked about what they
Ooh.
were and guided our viewers through it. So we've definitely talked about it. And a couple months ago, we actually had kind of a sound bath, sound healing type conversation as well, which was kind of fun. So tell us about your meditation.
Well, I resisted meditation for a
Mm-hmm.
long, long, long time. And the reason that I resisted was number one, I have a hard time sitting still. And number two, I had tried it a couple times and it made me feel all squirmy. And I'm like, I'm not getting anything out of this, so I'm not going to do it. But I've come to realize that meditation is like putting gas in your car's gas tank a drop at a time. So if your car's on empty and you put a drop in there, you're still not going to get very far. It builds up over time. So if you go into meditation expecting that you're going to feel fantastic within 3 days, yeah, you're not setting the right expectation for yourself.
Right.
And you're going to fail.
Right.
So with meditation, I think it's important to start off small. I'm pretty well practiced at it right now, but when I first started, it was literally all I could do to pick up my phone and set a 3-minute timer. And what I did, and I still do this because it's really simple, is I focus on breathing in a positive word like peace or serenity or clarity of thought. And then as I breathe out, I think of a negative word that I want to get rid of, like overthinking, obsessive thinking, anxiety, fear. And I can just do that. I can do that for 3 minutes. And it gets me fairly centered. The key is like focusing on your breath, and making sure they're actually exhaling completely, because a lot of people don't exhale. And you'll probably learn as you do this that you don't really breathe very well during the day either. Most of us don't. So that's how I started off. And then I developed this habit of like, I can put in earbuds and listen to like Lisa Gerard or some like really good meditation music. And I can go for 5 minutes or 6 minutes or 7 minutes. And the music's low, so it's not my focus, but it tunes out the white noise. I can go for a little bit longer. And then I found earplugs.
Yeah. Hey,
Which are
yo.
even better. It's like then I don't hear anything, and it really gives me clarity of thought, so I can focus on this. So I'm up to being able to do, anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes at a time and stay pretty focused. I want to talk about breathing really quickly. Meditation is something that we think that we have to do like when we have a half an hour, right? And I got to be alone in the house, nobody can be
Right.
around. And okay, it works great that way, right? But you can also do some simple tricks. You're gonna love this. The simple tricks that are gonna help you out and are very meditative. And my favorite one is the 4 by 4 7 8 routine for breathing. Heard that
Yep.
one? So you know that one, right? It's like breathe in for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. Exhaling for 8 is freaking hard
Hard.
until you get to that third breath. And the reason it's hard is because you're not breathing. So I can actually lock myself in the bathroom at work and like go in and do that. And nobody knows that I'm doing it before a big meeting. And it's a really, really good trick to not only calm my body, but calm my mind.
And we can do it anywhere, anytime, for some people who are on a production line. There's no reason that we can't do some of these things anytime, anywhere, and count it, as a
Yes.
meditation practice.
And I think that it works, Tara, because I actually find I have to focus on counting 4, 7, and 8. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I'm focusing on that, I'm not chewing on the problem. So it gives my mind a little bit of distance, and then I can come back to whatever that problem was with hopefully a little bit more clarity and peace.
Yes. And I just want to remind everybody that it's a practice. Mitch, are you perfect at meditating every single time? Or do you have some days where you just stink at it?
There are days when I get up for meditation and I'm like, I am
Oh.
so good. And then there are other days when I get up and I'm like, this is a freaking waste of time. What the heck am I doing?
I really blew it today.
Yep.
Yep.
And there are days that I go for 30 minutes, Tara, and I can't turn my mind off. And that's okay. It doesn't mean
It's
that
okay.
I stop. It just means, okay, didn't have a great day today, but I still got a little something out of it because I still feel a little more peaceful. But yeah, absolutely not perfect at it. Never going to be.
Yes. You mentioned a little bit of this when we were speaking before as well. And I would love for you to just dig in a little bit deeper on self-affirmations. You've mentioned some of these things already, but dig in a little bit deeper to what a self-affirmation is, how we find those, and how we use those.
Well, okay, so you remember vintage Saturday Night Live with Stuart Smalley? Do you ever remember
Yeah.
that? You can find that out on YouTube. It's like where he looks in the mirror and he's like, I am good enough, I am strong enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. Classic. And these things sound so trite, they sound so ridiculous, but they're so freaking true. I am actually a little bit of a fan of Louise Hay. And one of the things that she says over and over again is every thought you think and every word you speak affirms something. we have way more power between our ears than we ever realize that we do. And it doesn't mean that we can manifest the winning lottery ticket or the perfect relationship or the perfect job or, a complete annihilation of every threat actor on the face of the earth.
Right.
But we do have a lot of power. Most of us play overwhelmingly negative tapes in our heads. You're not good enough. You're never going to get done. What you did last week is not good enough for this week, and you got to completely break the banner once again. You're going to lose what you love or what you want to do. And those tapes are default for most of us, and affirmations disrupt that. And again, they sound trite, they sound a little tacky, but they really do work. There's a couple of them that I use that are quick hits. And for me, especially when I'm in negative thinking, I just pause and allow my mind to chew on the fact that it's like, I am strong, I am resilient, I am full of energy and full of life, and I am happy to be here. And that can actually shift my attitude if I say it enough times, 2 or 3 times, and then go back into a meeting or go back to whatever I have to do.
Yeah.
There are also times that I have to think about specific instances and specific things that are happening in my life. Let's say, like when I broke my leg, that was really difficult for me. I didn't walk for like almost a year. And even as somebody with a pretty rich and powerful spiritual practice, that got me down. That's actually why I was talking about Taylor Swift, because 1989 soundtrack was how I got through that whole year.
There you go. See, you found it.
I would have to actually sit down and think to myself, this is like, my healing has already begun. I am getting stronger. I am stronger than I was yesterday, and focus specifically on that. And I write them down. And so I can look at my phone, I keep my phone. And so I can go into a room where nobody is, and I can read these 3 to 5 to 6 sentences that lift me up, that build the positive message that I want, that remind me of who I want to be, not who I think I am.
Right.
So that's kind of a critical component. So just be aware of the power of your thoughts and your words, and be aware of those old mental tapes that are negative in your head, and don't let them choose you by default. Be active in how you choose to think about yourself.
Right. We haven't talked too much about the impact of other people on this as well, because we all deal with difficult people, whether it be at work, in our friendship groups, in do I dare say family occasionally. Family and friends and our social relationships can make things teeter. Am I right?
Well, the first one certainly can. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day, I think this is brilliant. The reason your family knows how to push your buttons is because they're the ones who installed them.
Yes.
So I think that's brilliant. And yes, my family is definitely up there as trigger. Some of my friends, and definitely some of my coworkers do, because I have some really, I mean, this is a high anxiety workforce, and I have some really, like, not just anxious personalities, but ornery personalities.
Yeah. Well, it's high stress. So how do you deal with them? Again, one of the things that you just mentioned for me is you can't control other people, but you can control how you act to them or your response to them. So that's,
yeah. My first point is going back to, like, everything that happens in your brain does not have to come out of your mouth. So pause. And you absolutely have the right to pause when somebody says something provocative and triggering, or even just flat out mean to you. The second thing that I remember is, I don't actually have to attend every argument that I'm invited to. I can decline. I have the option to just leave the room and opt out. And maybe it's your boss and you don't feel like you have that option, or maybe it's your dad and you don't feel like you have that option, but you do. And you do it by doing this. Well, okay, I hear what you're saying, and you might be right. So let me go think about that for a few minutes. And that completely takes the power away from the other person, because you haven't said you're right. You haven't said, oh, I'll change my life. You haven't said, you haven't given them any validation, but you've left the door open enough so they can't keep going at you about the same thing, because you said, oh, you might be right. And then you drop it, and then you go away.
Yes. And then Mitch and Tara leave the room and go do our 4-7-8 breathing.
Exactly. Then I go lock myself in the bathroom and do a fourth lemonade.
Exactly. No, I think those are great. I think, we don't talk about the social impact of other people and their opinions, and how that frames so much of that negativity in our mind. But again, do I dare
Well,
say boundaries? But again, you mentioned it.
it is boundaries. I want to talk about gossip because that happens a lot.
Ugh.
And I mean, my family's big into that, and I know you're listening, family. So I'm just going to call you out, and you do it. So, and it also happens at work, right? We all know the people at work who are, telling other people's secrets and always in the, the confines of like, oh, I really want to help, Jen out because she's got this XYZ going on and she's getting a divorce. And it's like, I think her husband cheated on her or she cheated on her. It's like, oh, la, 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 la. I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't want to hear, I don't want
None
to
of your
hear.
business.
Yes. So I think gossip, and for my family, it manifests in text chains. And again, I know you guys are listening, so pay attention. So it manifests in text chains, and there's always somebody who's left off the text chain, and that's who we're talking about. So I just won't engage in that. I think gossip is poisonous. Um, it destroys other people's character. It destroys the character of the person who shares it. And if you're going to take part in that and share it as well or engage it, it's going to poison you as well. Um, the best way to refute gossip is to just simply opt out. And if somebody continues to tell you something you don't want to hear, just say, I can't hear that. I don't want to hear it. And there's a kind of a litmus test I use before I share anything because I'm gay. I'm openly gay, and I work in a field that is like full of like former military and CIA, FBI, and there's a lot of like macho types in my field. And I've had people come out to me in like coworkers come out to me and they're like, you're not going to tell anybody this either, are you? And I'm just like, well, why would I tell you? But here's my test, Tara, is like before I say anything about anybody is number one, is it true? Number two, does repeating it build up goodwill and friendship? Number three, is telling it going to be beneficial to everyone? And last and most important is it my news to share in the first place? And if it's not, it goes in the vault.
Yep. I'm so glad this is recorded because I'm going to tell my 10 and 7-year-old all of those things. Because as adults, we still need to cycle back to those very, very early lessons that we learn.
Well, and it's like this happens too back when I go back home and I hang out with my high school friends and even my undergrad friends. It's just like there is this cycle where we still talk about each other. And I just won't do it anymore. I love to hear what they're up to, but when it gets into character assassination stuff and personal tragedy and disparaging remarks, I'm like, nope, not gonna do that. But
exactly, there is no Domino's for those things.
No, it's like feeding yourself Pringles when what you really want is like some baked chicken and quinoa. So don't give yourself Pringles.
Yeah, some kale chips.
Yeah.
Kale chips, not Pringles.
Yeah. Well, we do have
so Mitch, I love our conversation. And again, there's so many little pieces that I'm thinking about that, I'm going to write down in my positive journal versus my vomit journal. And I'm sure so many other people are getting these things as well. So Mitch, I would love for you to tell our listeners, it sounds like you have other podcasts and other things that you have going on. So where can other people see some of the things that you're up to?
Well, if you're on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me or follow me. I prefer connection because that way we can actually interact. Following is a little blind. I'm a person, so I do like personal connection. I am the host of a podcast called Into the Breach, which I talk about actual cyber breaches or things related to cybersecurity. And there's a couple of really, really interesting episodes out there. One on, is your information out on the dark web and what can threat actors do with it or how much is it worth? So that's another one. I've got one coming up I'm doing with an organization called Gate 15. It's going to be for all of you super nerds. It's going to be on Russian cyber espionage and what's happening with the war in Ukraine and what NATO countries are seeing. So that's more nation state threat focused. But I'm also going to put an article up on LinkedIn in a day or two. It's going to talk more deeply about what you and I talked about and refer people back to the podcast so they can take a listen of that as well. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. You can also find me on Instagram. On Instagram, I'm going to warn you, you're going to get a lot of gym pics because that is where I post my workouts and I track it. And yeah, so you're going to get some gym pics as well as some like really kind of funky. My favorite thing is to take pictures of stained glass windows in the old churches in San Francisco and like post those.
Awesome.
So there's
Yep.
a lot of those. Instagram and LinkedIn.
Love it. Mitch, thank you so much for joining us. It was so great to connect with you and connect with you again. I hope it is not the end for us and for your interaction with Orion. It's been amazing. So we would definitely love to have you back in the future to keep going down this path. You have so many, wise things to keep that head on your shoulders.
Well, thank you. You honor me, and I appreciate the compliments. And I will send you your check in the mail because I have to pay for all those. It's like they're all
Sure.
bribery. No, I appreciate that. This is something I'm super
I love
passionate
it.
about, and I am happy to share this stuff. As you can see, I not only nerd out about cyber, I also nerd out about this stuff because it's so important to me. And before I started doing this, Tara, it's like I was a completely different person. I didn't realize how much anger that I carried. I didn't realize how much sadness I carried. But since I've started implementing this stuff, it's like I'm free. I'm much more free.
Yes.
And all of us deserve that. So
100%. Yep.
that is why I'm passionate about it. So thanks for having me.
I love it. Yes. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, just a prompt for our next episode, we are going to be talking about plant-based eating as we go into the holidays. I know for me, I think turkey, I think stuffing, I think all of this stuff I probably shouldn't put into my body, but again, thinking about that in a little bit more of a plant-based method. So that's what we're talking about next month.
I'm
So if you
thinking
want to
about
circle
pumpkin
back,
pie. So, and
the vegetable.
that's sort of plant-based.
Yep. It's a vegetable or a fruit, whatever they call it.
Yep.
So thank you so much to all of our listeners. This is the Rise Up with Orion podcast. And thanks so much, Mitch, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.